Hey guys, tonight we'll drift into the dim, meandering corridors of medieval life. Through the eyes of those few unfortunate souls who lived in shadows, wielded daggers instead of dreams, and mostly suffered through terrible diets, cold feet, and confusing job expectations. Yes, tonight we'll explore why it really sucked to be a medieval assassin and more. So before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim your lights, settle under your blanket, let your shoulders relax and take a slow breath. There's no need to do anything right now, just breathe in and out, slowly. You're in good company, you're safe here. If this calm journey helps you unwind, perhaps tap the like button. Maybe subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure, just comfort. Now, let's ease into the cobbled alleys of a forgotten city. The flicker of torchlight, the soft clink of metal tucked beneath a woolen cloak, and somewhere, in the dark, someone muttering, "Wait, I have to scale what wall?" Let me take you back to a quiet corner of a damp medieval alley, behind a chicken coop that hasn't seen a cleaning since the last solar eclipse. You're crouched in a woolen tunic 3 sizes too large, smelling faintly of vinegar and failure. Why? Because you, dear listener, are about to be recruited. Except, this isn't some cool League of Shadows or sexy Assassin's Guild with engraved daggers and cryptic initiation rites. No, this is Osbert. Osbert, whose left boot has more holes than leather, leans against a barrel and squints at you like he's solving a riddle. "You look like you can climb," he says, ignoring the fact you just tripped over a goat. This apparently is your interview. No resume, no cover letter, no "why do you want to murder people for hire?" question. Just Osbert's squint, a questionable handshake, and a long-winded explanation about how to use a chicken bone to pick a door lock. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Now imagine biting into a barley biscuit that tastes like chalk and moss. That's your onboarding snack. "So," Osbert continues, "we mostly handle disgruntled landlords, treasonous monks, and sometimes very loud lute players." You nod solemnly because you're cold, hungry, and not entirely convinced this isn't a prank. A breeze creeps through the alley, carrying the scent of mouldy cabbage and ambition. Somewhere nearby, a rat sneezes. Osbert shows you your first weapon, a short dagger made from a repurposed horseshoe and spite. It's dull, it's bent, and honestly, it looks like it could do more damage to bread than to an enemy. Still, you take it with reverence, because you're now, officially, an assassin. Congratulations! Your first assignment is not glamorous. You're to sneak into the kitchen of Baron Humperquince's manor and, listen closely, steal his midnight cheese. Not poison it, not plant false documents, just take the cheese and disappear. Apparently the Baron believes a ghost haunts his cold cellar. Your job is to reinforce this belief. Psychological warfare, Osbert whispers, as if you're storming a castle rather than looting cheddar. You approach the manor at dusk. The sky bruises purple and ash, and distant bells toll like a bored cow yawning. Crickets chirp. Your cloak snags on every bush within a 2-mile radius. By the time you reach the back door, you've collected enough burrs to start a hedge. Inside, you step lightly over creaky wooden floors. The kitchen smells divine: rosemary, roasted onions, and something suspiciously like cinnamon. Your stomach growls, your resolve trembles, and there it is, the cheese. Glorious, golden, soft as a lullaby. Triple-aged goat's milk Gouda set beneath a linen wrap. You hesitate. Not because you fear being caught, but because this cheese is the most beautiful thing you've seen all week. Your eyes mist. Your hands tremble. You swipe it, wrap it in your sleeve, and vanish into the night like a lactose-intolerant phantom. Back at Osbert's hovel, which is, frankly, more moss than home, you're congratulated with a single dried plum and the privilege of not being kicked out. This, Osbert says proudly, is just the beginning. You chew your plum with the weariness of someone who's aged 3 years in one cheese heist. Rain begins to patter softly on the thatched roof. Somewhere nearby, a cat coughs up a mystery, and you wonder, is this what destiny tastes like? Sweetened prune, wet socks, and the distant tang of fear? And so ends your first day as a medieval assassin. Not with glory or riches or a thrilling rooftop chase, but with damp toes, stolen dairy, and a mild case of gastrointestinal regret from that biscuit earlier. But don't worry, it gets worse. Now, let your mind wander to the flickering torchlight of the next misadventure, where soup surprisingly becomes a lethal weapon. Shall we? Let me tell you about soup. Not the hearty kind with rich broth and lovingly simmered herbs. No, this was medieval soup. More like murky pond water that once heard of vegetables. Served lukewarm in a wooden bowl with a splintery spoon, it was, on most days, less of a meal and more of a personal challenge. So when Osbert leaned in one drizzly afternoon and whispered, "Tonight you will assassinate a duke with soup," I assumed he was joking. Osbert never jokes. The plan, such as it was, involved replacing the Duke of Nethergrim's evening pottage with one so offensive it would trigger a revolt. Not a military uprising, no, a culinary one. The Duke was known for his sensitive palate. Rumour had it he banished a baker once for underspicing a fig tart. So this, Osbert assured me, was psychological warfare at its most fragrant. Add pickled eel juice, he said, handing me a vial that smelled like betrayal, and dried nettles for texture. That evening, under the soft creak of tavern beams and the occasional drip of ceiling mildew, I crept into the Duke's private cookhouse. The fire was low, pots burbled lazily. The head cook snored into a hunk of dough, and I, a shadow among shadows, began seasoning treason. The eel brine sizzled as it hit the pot. The nettles crackled like dry parchment. I stirred with a carved ladle that looked suspiciously like it had been used to club someone once. The steam curled up and kissed my face with the stench of doom. As I ladled the concoction into the Duke's bowl, I wondered, was this really assassination or culinary assault? The next morning, word spread like wildfire. The Duke had not died, he had not fallen ill, but he had vomited dramatically in front of the entire court, flinging his wig at a minstrel and declaring war on all soups north of the river. Osbert was thrilled. "You've destabilized a region," he said proudly, "with legumes." He offered me a reward, a handful of roasted barley seeds and a foot massage from a guy named Edgar who smelled like boiled linen. I declined both. Instead, I took a walk through the misty fields outside town. The grass squished beneath my boots. A lone owl blinked at me from a tree branch, judging. I couldn't blame him. I sat on a mossy rock and thought about my life. About how last year I was mending fishing nets and dreaming of owning a goat, and now I was weaponizing soup. In the distance I heard the toll of a church bell, slow and heavy like an old man sighing. Fog rolled in like a lazy blanket, and I pulled my cloak tighter. Was I a villain? A hero? Or just really, really bad at finding honest work? Osbert had plans, always more plans. "The Bishop of Grimsby is next," he said, sipping weak cider and chewing on something that might have been bark. "We'll replace his communion wafers with beetroot chips. Won't he notice? Only if he has taste buds." I nodded slowly. My days now revolved around food crimes. One evening, while attempting to distract a stable hand by pretending to be a travelling spoon salesman, I realised just how far I'd drifted from normal. I spoke earnestly about grain curvature and the ideal ladling angle. The stable hand nodded with polite confusion. I sold him 3 spoons and disappeared before he asked for a receipt. Back at our hideout, I found a new addition to our arsenal. A sack of slightly fermented onions and a wooden whistle carved to sound like a distressed goat. "These," Osbert said solemnly, "will bring down a corrupt abbess by sunrise." I said nothing. I'd stopped questioning the logic weeks ago. The wind that night howled through the crooked timbers of our shack. Rain tapped the roof like impatient fingers. I lay awake wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of mildew and regret, and thought about beetroot, about how absurdly effective it was when dried and salted, about how many times I'd nearly been caught, about how no one ever mentioned assassins having to clean their own boots after wading through pig pens. Outside, a dog barked at nothing. A rooster crowed early, clearly confused, and in that moment, under the flickering light of a sputtering candle, I realised something important. This job sucked. Not because of the danger, not even because of the food, but because despite all this effort, no one ever said thank you. And as we tiptoe away from that musty kitchen, soup pot still simmering, let your thoughts drift to the icy mountain top where our next tale unfolds, where assassins and sheep share a most unfortunate misunderstanding, shall we? Let me tell you, nothing prepares you for the bitter chill of the mountains. Not a wool cloak, not a fire, not even Osbert's bizarre herbal foot wraps, made from mashed mint and vinegar-soaked twine. The cold doesn't care. It seeps into your teeth, your fingernails, even your dreams. So why were we up there? Because someone, somewhere, had decided the next target lived in a monastery perched atop Cragmore Peak. A place so remote it made exile look like a beach vacation. The mark? Brother Celandine, a monk with a secret, and apparently an enemy of Osbert's mysterious employer. Our mission? Infiltrate the monastery, recover a scroll he'd hidden, and if necessary, make him vanish. Except, it wasn't that simple. We weren't the only ones on that mountain. I remember the first slip. My boot found a patch of black ice beneath the snow, and suddenly I was less trained infiltrator and more tumbling sack of potatoes. Down I went, rolling past a shocked marmot and nearly into a flock of grazing sheep. One of them blinked at me. I swear it judged me. We weren't planning on dealing with livestock, but the monks loved their sheep, herded them, named them, prayed over them. There was a sheep named Simon who apparently had his own blanket. This somehow was the greatest obstacle to our plan. Sheep-related noise. Monks sleep lightly, you see, and sheep, infamously disloyal when startled. One bar at the wrong time and it's all over. Our disguises were simple. Robes, sandals, look of vaguely righteous hunger. I'd practiced my monk face in a frozen puddle for 20 minutes. Pious, meek, slightly constipated. We arrived at the monastery at dusk, shivering and slick with sleet. The gatekeeper, a hunched man named Wilfred, peered at us with suspicion. "Pilgrims?" he croaked. "Seeking penance," Osbert answered, clutching his side dramatically. Wilfred nodded. "You'll sleep in the West Hall, no snoring." We bowed, snuck inside, and began our investigation. Let me paint the scene. The monastery smelled of wax and old paper. Candles flickered like nervous thoughts. Every floorboard creaked like it had secrets. We moved through shadow, whispering plans and trying not to knock over sacred relics. Brother Celandine's cell was simple. A bed, a stool, and beneath the floorboards, a small compartment. Osbert found it while I distracted a novice with philosophical questions about parsnips. He had opinions. Inside the compartment, the scroll. We'd done it. The mission technically was complete. But then came Simon. Simon the sheep had wandered into the hallway. How? No one knows. Perhaps divine punishment. Perhaps sheer spite. But there he was, staring at me as I emerged from the cell. I froze. He blinked. I tiptoed. He barred. Loudly, aggressively, righteously. Suddenly the bells were ringing, candles lit, monks shouting, one threw a sandal. I panicked. Osbert sprinted. I slipped again, and Simon, bless him, began chasing me. We fled down the icy slope, scroll tucked inside Osbert's tunic, robes flapping like sails. Behind us, the sound of hooves and shouted prayers. I'm fairly certain one monk cursed me in Latin. Back at the base of the mountain, we collapsed near a fallen log, lungs burning, limbs numb. That, Osbert wheezed, was sacred cheese all over again. We lay there in silence, staring up at the stars. I thought about Brother Celandine, about the scroll, about Simon, the sheep who nearly ended my career, and I realized most of this job was not killing people. It was running. Running from nobles, from monks, from livestock, and often from common sense. We sold the scroll. It funded 3 days' worth of food and 1 hot bath, which we shared in awkward silence at the inn in Coldbrook. The innkeeper served us boiled turnips and stale ale. I'd never been so happy. Osbert toasted to mission success. I toasted to still having both ankles. We didn't talk about Simon, not out loud, but I knew, deep down, we'd never forget. And as the stars fade behind that frostbitten ridge, let your thoughts meander toward the warm hearth of a bustling tavern, where pastries hold more secrets than patrons, shall we? The tavern smelled like burned wood and forgotten dreams. It was the kind of place where the chairs wobbled, the fire crackled with mysterious colours, and everyone either had a secret or desperately wanted one. It was called the Wilted Thistle, and it sat like a drunk uncle at the edge of the merchant quarter, slouched, loud, and full of questionable stew. This time we weren't hunting monks or scaling mountains. We were after a baker. Osbert had received a parchment sealed with wax and spattered with what looked like gravy. "Eliminate the threat within the thistle," it said. "They hide in plain sight." Now, this would have been more helpful if it had mentioned who they were, but that was the problem with medieval job postings, vague, ominous, and usually smudged by food. We were to enter the tavern, locate the baker-turned-threat, and do something. We weren't sure yet. Poison, bribery, a strongly worded note. The thistle was packed. Traders, travellers, a troop of jugglers who'd clearly had better days. They all gathered by the fire, mugs in hand, gossip on their lips. The barkeep had arms like loaves and a stare that could sour cream. In the corner sat the baker. We knew it was him because of the puff pastry tower in front of him. 6 flaky layers stacked with alarming precision. It shimmered with honey glaze. It radiated importance. Osbert squinted. "That's our man." I squinted back. "How do you know?" "Look at the symmetry. That's not just dessert, that's a manifesto." We approached slowly, casual-like, as if we too were there for the pastries. I ordered one. It melted in my mouth with the buttery grace of a noble woman's sigh. The baker looked up, eyes twinkling. "You like it?" he asked. I nodded. "It's divine." He leaned in, voice low. "They're more than pastries, they're messages." I blinked. "What?" He peeled back a layer, revealing a slip of parchment, thin, oily, curled from heat. It read, "The Duchess plots in flour." Osbert and I exchanged glances. We'd stumbled onto something deeper. Turns out the baker, name was Yorick, wasn't just making treats. He was part of a pastry-based underground information network. Puff pastry for political intrigue. Tarts for trade secrets. A cherry strudel once triggered a bishop's exile. And now Yorick was in danger. "The Thistle's cook is working for the Duchess," he whispered. "He plans to poison the custard tonight. Frame me. Ruin the resistance." This was not what we signed up for. That night we did something unexpected. We protected our mark. While Osbert distracted the cook by inventing a tale about a rogue cheese wheel terrorizing the cellar, I slipped into the kitchen. The custard pot sat atop a low fire, golden and thick. Beside it, a vial of something greenish and sinister. I knocked it over by accident. It sizzled. The scent? Sour almonds and guilt. At the pastry contest later that evening, which was a very serious affair, complete with judges' ribbons and a bard narrating, Yorick's eclairs won. Barely. The cook's tart collapsed mid-judging, causing one noble to faint. We slipped out before dawn. Yorick thanked us with a bag of warm buns and a whispered promise. "If you ever need a pie that tells the truth, I'm your man." We camped under the stars that night, bellies full of sweet bread and heads full of questions. "How did this become our life?" I asked, staring up at the dark sky. Osbert shrugged. "You chase one cheese wheel and suddenly you're rewriting history with pastries." We listened to the crackle of the fire, the soft rustle of leaves. The world for a moment felt kind. I drifted to sleep with the taste of honey on my lips and the absurdity of espionage-filled eclairs in my mind. And now, as we leave behind that cosy tavern and its edible conspiracies, let your thoughts wander to a moonlit garden, where secrets bloom between snails and sabotage. Shall we? Let me take you far from the clamour of city streets and the smoky breath of taverns. Drift instead toward the countryside, where the trees lean in close like old women trading secrets, and the grass underfoot sighs with every step. There, tucked behind ivy-covered walls and under the sleepy shadow of 3 unbothered hills, lies the overgrown estate of Lord Hemsworth the Lesser. Not to be confused with Lord Hemsworth the Greater, who was greater only in gout and in volume of his laugh, which could shatter windows and peace treaties alike. Hemsworth the Lesser, on the other hand, had one of those unsettling voices that floated just above a whisper, a voice made for secrets, His estate, too, was built for concealment. No grand banners, no roaring fires or hunting horns, just a crumbling garden of topiary oddities, silent reflecting pools, and stone paths that circle back when they got bored of leading you anywhere useful. We were not there for sightseeing. We had a job: retrieve a single brass key from Lord Hemsworth's private study. Why? Osbert simply said. The key's shape matches a lock in a different place. Don't ask. Eat this. He handed me cold meat pie and a small pouch of dried gooseberries soaked in vinegar. The pie was somehow both stale and slimy. I chewed in silence and nodded. That's how most of our mission started. We arrived at dusk. The sky hung low like a tired curtain. A few crows gave us suspicious glances and flew off in opposite directions, as if they'd argued. The air was heavy with lavender, thyme, and the faint smell of old wood slowly turning to soil. The estate's outer wall was 12 feet high and covered in tangled rose vines that offered both camouflage and a healthy supply of accidental bloodletting. We climbed slowly, trying not to curse audibly. At the top, Osbert slipped. A thorn the size of a dining fork went through his sleeve and part of his dignity. "It's fine," he hissed. "Just a scratch." It wasn't. The grounds were stranger than expected. The hedges had been sculpted into human shapes. Dancers, scholars, even a large topiary chicken holding what might have been a lute. Each bush seemed to watch us as we crept past. Wind rustled through their stiff, leafy limbs, creating a soft symphony of disapproval. The garden maze was our first obstacle. We weren't supposed to go through it, but Osbert insisted it would be faster. It wasn't. 45 minutes later, we emerged with leaf hair, at least one incorrect Latin proverb scribbled on a stone, and a growing suspicion that the maze rearranged itself when no one was looking. We found a servant's door behind the greenhouse, half-rotted, creaky, and entirely overlooked by the guards, who were too busy arguing about whether pickled onions or fermented turnips made for better travelling food. Inside, the manor smelled of wax, damp stone, and forgotten responsibility. The floorboards whispered with every step, but Osbert had brought strips of wool to wrap our shoes. "Monk socks," he whispered proudly. "Silent souls." We moved room to room, past a drawing room where a fire smouldered sadly, past a hallway of portraits where every ancestor glared with slowly fading paint. We paused briefly at a table filled with crumbling pastries and a bowl of something that might have been pickled pears or very ambitious slugs. And then we found it, the study. A tall door of dark oak carved with a pattern that looked suspiciously like 3 frogs playing chess. Osbert raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We pressed our ears to the wood. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, he twisted the latch. The door creaked inward like a stretching yawn. Inside, everything was too quiet. The air felt thick. Dust hovered mid-air like it didn't dare settle. The hearth was cold, but the embers still held a memory of warmth. On the desk, papers, a quill, and a brass key sitting on top of a ledger bound in cracked leather. There it was, the key. Not grand, not glowing, just a simple looped brass shape with teeth filed oddly sharp. Osbert reached for it and froze. Because just above the desk was a mirror, and in that mirror was Lord Hemsworth, standing in the corner behind us. "I do hope you're not stealing from me," he whispered. We turned slowly. There he stood, tall, thin, wrapped in a robe that shimmered like damp moss. He had the kind of face that looks like it was carved from wax by someone with very cold hands. His eyes were the colour of burnt tea. Osbert said nothing. He just slowly slipped the key into his sleeve. I smiled. "We were admiring your furniture." Lord Hemsworth blinked slowly. "That desk belonged to my grandfather. He once defeated a magistrate using only his ledger and a goose." I nodded solemnly. "A noble heritage." He stepped forward. "What brings you here?" "Now, there are times when the truth is your enemy, and times when it's your greatest weapon." I took a breath. "We're delivering a message," I said, "from the Order of the Lavender Path." Osbert coughed. Lord Hemsworth frowned. "I thought they were extinct." "Not entirely," I whispered. "Some of us survive, in shadows and topiary." He stared at us for a long time. Then, to my eternal surprise, he nodded. "Of course. Forgive my suspicion. He turned away. We backed toward the door like nervous butlers, and then, quietly, we ran. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the hills, the manor now a distant candle on the horizon. The key was in Osbert's pocket. The gooseberries were gone. My socks were damp with lavender dew. We lay in the grass and let the moonlight wash over us. "That went well," I said. Osbert laughed softly. "We should start a new order. Call it the Path of the Sleepy Knife." I nodded. "Or the Brotherhood of Slightly Uncomfortable Furniture." The stars blinked above us. The wind carried the scent of thyme and wet bark. Somewhere, a lone owl asked a question that had no answer. And now, dear listener, let your thoughts sink gently into those moonlit hedgerows. Let the hush of the garden, the hush of that narrow escape, lull your breathing slower, deeper, and softer. Because our next journey will take us far beneath the streets, into tunnels where ancient candles still burn and secrets echo like dripping water in the dark. Shall we? Imagine a place where your footsteps sound like memories, where the air smells of limestone, wet rope, and regret, where candles burn without flickering, because even the drafts are too tired to move. That, dear listener, is where we found ourselves next, the underground catacombs beneath the city of Elderford, a place older than any map, deeper than most lies, and colder than a tax collector's handshake. The mission? Retrieve a scroll. Not just any scroll, the scroll of twine. No, it wasn't magical. It didn't contain forbidden spells or ancient recipes. According to Osbert, it was a very boring legal document accidentally misplaced by a baron's accountant during a funeral feast. Somehow, the scroll had made its way down through a dumbwaiter, past a mausoleum, and into the depths of the city's burial tunnels. Why did we need it? "Because," Osbert muttered as we descended the first mossy stone stairwell, "it has a royal seal on it, and people pay quite a lot for seals they didn't earn." The tunnels welcomed us like a grandmother who's just realized you broke her teapot. It was quiet but not empty. Bones neatly stacked, runes scratched into walls, candles half melted into skulls, and an echo that seemed to repeat your fears back to you a half-second later. Osbert's torch gave off a light that was more apology than illumination. He held a crudely drawn map. I held a lantern and my breath. There's a specific kind of silence down there. Not peaceful, not serene, but dense, like the air itself is listening, waiting, breathing. We followed the path, turning left at a pile of femurs shaped like a chair, then right at a statue of St. Marnus, patron of reluctant gravediggers. I made the mistake of looking into his eyes. They were sculpted with such eternal disappointment that I felt bad for existing. Eventually we came upon a door. Heavy oak, iron hinges, a warning scratched in Latin. Osbert translated slowly. "Here lie the things we forgot to forget." I squinted. "Comforting," he shrugged. "Could be worse. Last one said enter and regret, remember?" Behind the door was a crypt, but not just any crypt. This one was filled with furniture. Broken chairs, bent bed frames, a harp missing all but one string. Osbert blinked. "What is this?" I scanned the room. Looks like the burial chamber of someone who hoarded regrets. In the centre, on top of a table fashioned from stacked headstones, sat the scroll, tied with red twine, stamped with a seal depicting a very annoyed-looking badger. That was it. We stepped forward. Then the harp sang, one note. High, sharp, and undeniably intentional. We froze. The shadow shifted. From the far end of the room a figure rose. Not ghost, not skeleton, but a man in a cloak so dusty it looked like it was made of shadows and cobwebs. "Leave the scroll," he said. "It belongs to the forgotten." Osbert raised a hand, polite. "Actually, it belongs to a tax clerk who's been crying into his inkpot for 3 weeks. The figure stepped forward. "I guard these relics. I am the archivist. I do not file. I do not catalogue. I protect." His voice echoed off the stone with theatrical menace. It would have been more impressive if he hadn't tripped over a stool. Osbert took the opportunity. He tossed a pouch of pepper dust into the air, one of his favourite distractions. The archivist coughed violently, knocking over an urn that spilled what might have been ancestral coins or extremely outdated peppermints. We grabbed the scroll and bolted. Running through catacombs is not recommended. You will trip, You will curse. You will hit your head on something labelled "Beware of Ceiling." But we made it. We climbed out through an old well shaft behind the Elderford bakery, emerged covered in dust, and collapsed beside the loading crates. We lay there panting. The baker blinked at us, said nothing, went back to glazing rolls. Osbert wiped his brow. "Well, that was stupid," I laughed. "Yes, but profitable." He held up the scroll, and then it rained. Softly, warm droplets, cleansing in a way that felt personal. Later that night, as we sat in a quiet attic eating stale oat cakes and sipping watered wine, I looked at the scroll again. So plain, so ordinary, and yet it had dragged us through the underworld. Osbert toasted to surviving another paperwork recovery mission. I toasted to never entering a room full of haunted furniture again. Outside, the rain hummed on the shingles. Inside, the candle's flame danced like it had a secret. And now, as your breath deepens, and the shadows of those catacombs fade gently into mist, allow your thoughts to wander to a windswept field where banners flutter and breakfast gets surprisingly political. Shall we? Let me take you to a field. Not just any field, but one of those wide, wind-kissed meadows that stretches far too long in every direction, where the grass whispers in little eddies, and the birds chirp like they have had too much cider. The sun is just barely peeking over the hill, reluctant, like a teenager being asked to help with chores. At the centre of this field, a ridiculous number of tents are scattered. Bright colours, flapping banners, and polished armour gleaming like someone really cared about visual impressions. This was the royal encampment of Crown Prince Eldric the slightly delayed, son of King Alaric the reasonably competent. It was war. Well, technically. In reality, it was more of a diplomatic standoff disguised as a breakfast meeting, and somehow Osbert had secured us a position in the camp kitchen. "You're not serious," I whispered as we carried 2 sacks of barley into the food tent. "It's the perfect cover," he muttered. "No one pays attention to the porridge staff." He wasn't wrong. Prince Eldric was known for 3 things: his golden hair, his fondness for falcons, and his inability to wake up on time. Every campaign, every meeting, every battle, delayed because his royal sluggishness had not yet stirred. This time his enemies had noticed. The rival house of Greyvale had challenged him to a formal negotiation at sunrise, hoping his tardiness would embarrass the crown. But what they didn't know was that someone had bribed the porridge staff, that someone was our client, and what they wanted was simple. We were to sabotage the prince's breakfast, just enough to delay him further. Not poison, not peril, just inconvenience. "You'll add this," Osbert whispered, handing me a small satchel. "Ground-dried figs soaked in cider. It causes drowsy digestion." I blinked. "We're weaponizing breakfast?" He nodded solemnly. "Porridge warfare." Inside the royal kitchen, chaos bloomed like a wet fungus. Cookpots boiled, steam curled upward, spoons clattered. At least 2 apprentices were crying. Someone had set fire to a bowl of dried beans as a test. We moved quietly, stirring oats, ladling broth, blending in the sleepy fig powder with all the solemnity of a secret ritual. I felt a little guilty. Then I remembered that Prince Eldric once banned a town crier for shouting too early. I stirred faster. The prince's bowl was carried off by a servant in crisp linen. We watched from the shadows. Moments later, a trumpet sounded. A horn replied, and from the main tent came the weary, unmistakable voice of the prince. 5 more minutes. Osbert smiled. "That's the 3rd delay this week. The Greyvale envoys will be fuming." I raised an eyebrow. "And this helps. How?" He shrugged. "Not our business. Someone wants a delay. We give them porridge that turns a man into a pillow." The rest of the day we remained in the camp kitchen, blending in, scrubbing pots, and occasionally suggesting that maybe breakfast should include pickled carrots. No one listened. Around noon, news came in, negotiations postponed, Greyvale delegation offended, Prince Eldric napping in full armour still snoring, mission complete. We slipped away before evening, when the stew fight began. Apparently someone insulted the leeks, a ladle was thrown, history was made. Back in the woods, by a soft little creek where frogs held polite meetings on smooth stones, we sat down to eat the leftovers we'd smuggled in our sleeves. Crusty bread, a wedge of herb cheese, and a very confused boiled egg. Osbert chuckled. I miss the days when missions involved rooftops and poison. I sipped from a flask of watered cider. I don't. I like porridge. It's quieter. We lay back in the grass. The stars began to arrive one by one. A gentle breeze tugged at the edges of our cloaks. There, between battles not fought and breakfasts subtly sabotaged, I realized something simple. The world didn't need us to be deadly, just timely, and occasionally sleepy. And now, as the field fades behind us, and the scent of oats and diplomacy drifts into the wind, let your mind wander toward a coastal inn where fish pies hold long grudges, and one errant seagull changes everything, shall we? Imagine waking up to the sound of waves gently breaking against a stony shore, the occasional clatter of a crab skittering across a pail, and, most notably, the ungodly screech of a seagull attempting to steal someone's breakfast. That's Gull's End for you. A tiny coastal village, always half covered in fog and smelling like smoked herring, burnt toast, and damp optimism. Most of the buildings leaned slightly to one side, as if they'd just barely survived an argument with the wind. There was a lighthouse that no longer lit, a boat that never sailed, and an inn that had apparently declared war on the local gull population. It was in this inn, called the Soggy Harpoon, that our next mission began, and naturally it involved pie. We arrived under cover of mist, our cloaks soaked through and our boots filled with grit and regrets. Osbert was grumbling about barnacles again. I was more focused on the scent drifting from the kitchen window. Fish pie. Rich, buttery, with a crust that shimmered like an oiled tapestry. We stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the warmth of the hearth and the unmistakable sound of someone losing at dice in the corner. The innkeeper, a woman named Breda, who had arms like fence posts and a voice like boiling cider, looked us over. "Here for pie or mischief?" she asked. "Why not both?" Osbert replied cheerfully. She liked that. Gave us a room and a slice of haddock pie each. The job was simple. Retrieve a ledger that proved a certain magistrate had been smuggling pearls in barrels of dried cod. The ledger, of course, was hidden somewhere in the inn. Our client suspected the innkeeper was protecting it, or perhaps didn't know it was there at all. The problem, so did someone else. Because the same day we arrived, so did a man in a feathered hat and suspiciously clean boots. He claimed to be a tax inspector, but we saw through that immediately. Real inspectors don't tip waitstaff in foreign coins or order their fish pies with no crust. No crust. Blasphemy. So began a quiet contest. Who would find the ledger first? We searched the attic. Nothing but salted ropes and one very judgmental cat. We checked under the floorboards. Only dust, a spoon, and something that may have once been a toad. Osbert had a theory. The ledger was hidden in the pie room. Yes, the pie room. Small kitchen annex dedicated entirely to pastry preparation. Warm, flowery, and heavily guarded by Breda's niece, who took her rolling pin duties very seriously. Osbert tried to flirt his way in. She threw dough at him. I tried a different tactic. That night I challenged the fake inspector to a pie-eating contest. Why? Distraction. While the common room roared with laughter and chants of one more slice, Osbert snuck into the pie room. Behind a loose tile near the oven, he found a hollow space. Inside, a tin box. Inside the box, the ledger. Mission complete. The inspector, full of haddock and fury, never suspected a thing. He left the next morning, groaning and crust-covered, muttering about indigestion and betrayal. We stayed one more day. Breda thanked us with extra pie and a pouch of smoked sea salt for the road. I still don't know if she knew what we'd done, but she winked as we left. I think she knew. Outside, the wind had shifted. The gulls screamed above like they were narrating a tragedy. Osbert tossed a bit of crust to the sky. A gull snatched it mid-air, dropped a feather, and flew off in triumph. We walked along the shore, the sun peeking out for the first time in days, our boots still soggy, our mission ridiculous, fish-scented, and successful. And now, let your thoughts drift from that salt-soaked harbour and into the cool, quiet stillness of an ancient library, where books whisper, and silence is more dangerous than swords. Shall we? There are places in the world where sound dares not linger, where every breath feels rehearsed, and every footstep is a trespass. Where the books don't just sit, they watch. This was Dreadhollow Library, not a public place, not even a royal archive. This was a private collection so vast and so forgotten it had developed weather. Yes, certain aisles had their own humidity. Some had drizzle. One section, Osbert swore, had fog and a faint smell of roasted walnuts. It sat beneath the old monastery of Witherglen, hidden behind a clock that hadn't told the correct time since the previous dynasty. To enter, one had to adjust the long hand to midnight, whisper a line from a banned poem, and feed a coin into a slot shaped like a snake eating its own tail. Only then would the shelves move. Only then would the stairs descend. Only then would the quiet become real. We were there to steal a book. Well, not steal, really. Borrow indefinitely. The tome was called the Codex of Unfortunate Promises, a collection of oaths, contracts, and deals that had once bound nobles, thieves, and one very confused goose. It was rumoured to contain a forgotten clause that could void an alliance between two neighbouring duchies, an alliance someone clearly wanted broken. Our client didn't ask us to read it, just take it, which was probably for the best. The library was immense, a labyrinth of shelves that stretched so high they faded into gloom. Candlelight glimmered in glass orbs that floated overhead, moving only when no one looked directly at them. The air was thick with dust, leather, and the faint murmur of echoing pages being turned far, far away. We wore slippers to muffle our steps. Even Osbert whispered. That alone should tell you how serious this was. The Codex, according to the last known ledger, was located in Section 3, R, somewhere between dangerous folk tales and recipes for things that shouldn't be eaten. We wandered through aisles of cursed cookbooks and scrolls wrapped in silk. A portrait watched us frowningly from above a shelf labelled Disappointing Nights. I paused at a book titled Jousting with Feelings. Tempting. But we had work to do. The librarians found us first. Not in the usual sense, not people in robes with glasses perched on their noses. These were different. Pale, tall, robed figures with ink-stained fingers and scroll tattoos along their arms. They didn't walk. They glided. And they smelled of moths, sandalwood, and overly critical marginalia. One appeared as we reached the right shelf. "You're not scribes," it said, in a voice that sounded like it had come through parchment. Osbert bowed. "We're assistants. Temporary. Transcription interns." The librarian narrowed its eyes. "You carry no quills?" I held up a feather. "For inspiration." It studied us a moment longer, then turned away. We didn't wait. The Codex was heavier than expected, bound in grey leather, clasped in iron, and with a ribbon marker that hissed when touched. Osbert wrapped it in a wool scarf and tucked it into our satchel. As we turned to leave, a whisper curled through the shelves. "Return what you take." I froze. The librarians were gone, the candles flickered, and the book in our bag shifted. We didn't run. Running in a library, even a cursed one, just felt rude. We walked, briskly. The stairs welcomed us back with a groan. The clock door closed with a sigh. Back in the monastery above, the sun filtered weakly through stained glass. We'd done it. Book retrieved. Mission complete. Sort of. Osbert held up the satchel. "You think it'll bite us?" I shrugged. "Let's not read it and find out." We left Witherglen before dusk, walking through a grove of wind-worn trees and down a slope of soft moss. The air smelled cleaner out here, less bound. That night, beside a quiet stream, we burned the scarf and hid the book beneath a rock marked only with a carved spoon. Let someone else worry about forgotten promises. We had new troubles to chase. And now, as the candles flicker out behind us and the shadows of long-forgotten bookshelves grow still once more, let your thoughts drift toward a windswept bridge, where tolls are paid not in coin but in songs no one remembers. Shall we? Somewhere between nowhere and Are We Lost Again lies a bridge. Old, crooked, and too narrow for carts, but somehow just wide enough for secrets. The locals call it Briarspan, though no briars grow there anymore. The name just stuck, like most things in this world that sound ominous and slightly poetic. The bridge isn't made of wood or stone, it's made of something else. a pale, smooth surface that hums ever so softly when touched. The sound isn't music, not exactly, more like the distant memory of a lullaby you once heard in a dream you don't quite remember. The bridge is alive, they say, or listening, or both. We didn't mean to end up there. Our original route had us passing through the town of Culcroft, where we were meant to meet a messenger who claimed to have a map that revealed the location of a hidden vault buried beneath an orchard of perpetual apples. But the messenger never arrived. What did arrive? Rain, buckets of it. A storm so violent it ripped the signs from their posts and herded goats into homes uninvited. We sought shelter. The road split. We took the left path, assuming the right would be muddier. That's how we found the bridge. Or rather, how the bridge found us. It didn't look like much at first. Mist curled over its surface, hiding the far end. No guardrails, no carvings, just a single faded sign. Cross with a song or not at all. Osbert squinted. Is it threatening us? I think it's encouraging creativity, I offered. He groaned. I don't sing, not after the Cabbage Festival incident. That was fair. But rules were rules. We tried humming and nothing. We tried reciting a tavern rhyme about turnips. The mist thickened, unimpressed. Finally, Osbert began mumbling an old lullaby his grandmother used to sing. Something about a nightjar and a missing shoe. The bridge responded. A soft vibration beneath our boots. The mist shifted. The far end appeared. We crossed slowly, the hum beneath us echoing each note like the bridge was singing along, or judging our pitch. On the other side, everything felt quieter. The storm had stopped. The road was dry, and in the distance a single figure stood beneath a crooked tree holding a satchel and looking far too calm for someone in this world. The messenger, late, damp, but alive. He handed us the map, apologised for the delay, and offered us each a small cake wrapped in lavender-scented cloth. As compensation, he said. Also, my aunt insists. We didn't argue. The map was beautiful, ink faded but deliberate. It showed a field of apple trees that supposedly never aged. Beneath one, marked only with a star and the word sorrow, lay a hidden trap door. We were to find it. Why? The usual reasons: someone wanted what was inside. We didn't know what that was, probably gold, possibly a curse. But first, rest. We camped near the edge of the trees just beyond the bridge's reach. I dreamed of music. Not songs I knew, just soft, wordless tunes that echoed in my bones. The kind of music you hum when there's nothing left to say. In the morning, Osbert stood by the bridge listening. I think it remembers us, he said. Shall we say goodbye? He shrugged. Might not be done with us yet. We waved anyway. The bridge hummed back, just once, low and soft, like a sigh. And now, as the hum fades and the mist rolls quietly back into the hills, let your thoughts wander to that orchard of perpetual apples, and the quiet door waiting in its roots. Shall we? Imagine an orchard where the apples never fall, where each tree stands frozen mid-sway, as though paused between one breath and the next, where fruit stays crisp and red for years, untouched by birds, bugs, or time itself. That was the orchard on the map, the one marked with a star and a single handwritten word: sorrow. No path led to it, no village claimed it, and no story explained its quiet defiance of seasons. But there it was, just beyond the hills, nestled in a gentle valley where fog slept like a cat curled into moss. We arrived near dusk. The air was still, too still, not even a cricket dared chirp. The apple trees were tall, limbs wide and symmetrical, as if planted by someone with an obsessive fondness for grids. The fruit glowed in the fading light. Dozens, hundreds. None had dropped. Not one. Osbert reached for an apple. Don't, I whispered. He paused. Why not? It feels like they'd bruise you back. He nodded, pulling his hand away. Some instincts you don't question. According to the map, the trapdoor lay beneath the tree marked sorrow. But none of the trees had signs, just identical trunks, roots like ribbons and eyes. Yes, eyes, drawn into their bark. Not actual eyes, but knots, spirals, whorls. Some patterns resembled tears, some didn't. We wandered through rows that all looked the same until we found one tree different. No apples, its branches bare, though just as green, and beneath it, a patch of earth untouched by moss. Osbert knelt, brushing it with his sleeve. Wood, a door. The hinges sighed as we lifted it. Beneath, a narrow ladder, slick with age and something that smelled like damp candle wax. We descended, one rung at a time, the light fading with every breath. At the bottom, silence, and then a voice. "Have you come to remember or to forget?" We turned. A woman stood there, dressed in a robe of stitched leaves, holding a lantern that glowed with no flame. Osbert began. "Shh," she said gently. "The room listens." The space was round, carved from stone. Shelves circled the walls, each holding a single object: a spoon, a child's shoe, a cracked bell, a dried flower pressed into glass. Memories, she called them, things too painful to carry, so they were buried instead. "It's what sorrow means here," she explained. "Not grief, just burden that asks to rest." She gestured toward a pedestal. On it sat a small wooden box locked with a symbol of a sleeping face. That was our target. Osbert approached it slowly. "No traps?" I asked. The woman smiled. "Only the kind you bring with you." He lifted the box. The room didn't shake. No lights flashed. No curses screamed. Just a single apple fell somewhere above us. The first to ever fall. We climbed back up into starlight. The orchard had changed. The trees still stood, but the mist had lifted. And beneath the bare tree where we'd opened the door, the grass now grew, tall, alive, new. We didn't speak for a long time. There are places that don't give you answers, just softness. Just wait, lessened. We walked out of the orchard with the box, a mission complete. But the stillness, it came with us. That night, camped near a slow river, Osbert whispered, "What do you think is in the box?" I shrugged. "Something someone once needed to forget." He nodded, gently placing it under his pack. Neither of us tried to open it. Not everything hidden is meant to be found. And now, let your thoughts curl around the roots of that strange orchard, swaying gently in a breeze that doesn't quite exist, and prepare to follow us into a chapel with no prayers, only riddles carved in wax and a ceiling that drips secrets. Shall we? They told us the chapel had no doors, that it had been sealed since the Frostful riots, when 3 nobles vanished mid-sermon and the bishop dissolved into candlelight. They said the walls were made of wax, beeswax to be precise, yellowed and thick and carved with prayers no one dared recite aloud. Naturally, Osbert insisted we go there immediately. The job was simple, in the usual complicated way. A nobleman wanted us to retrieve a seal ring that had belonged to his ancestor, a man who'd taken refuge in the wax chapel during the riots and, according to rumour, had never come out. The family wanted closure, or at least proof the ring still existed, maybe to claim a title, maybe just for dinner conversation. Osbert didn't ask. I didn't care. We just needed to find the chapel first. It lay beyond the bramble fields of Southmere, tucked between 2 ridges like an apology. The terrain was cruel, thorns, mud, and one unfortunate ditch that smelled like fermented dreams. But then, as the sun dipped behind the hill, we saw it. A lump of structure. Pale, rippling faintly in the fading light. Not stone, not clay, but wax, solidified in layers like tree rings. The windows were sealed. The roof sagged slightly, but the structure held its shape with unsettling elegance. Osbert pressed a hand to the wall. It was warm, just barely, breathing almost. "We go through the side," he muttered. He took out a small tool wrapped in linen, thin as a quill, sharp as rumour. He found a crack where 2 wax panels had split from time and heat, and with a few careful movements peeled back a slice like skin. Inside, the air smelled sweet and wrong, like honey left too long beside old wood. The floor was uneven. Candles melted long ago had formed stalagmites of wax. Drips hung mid-fall from the ceiling, frozen in a moment they never finished. Light came from somewhere, but not the sun. A soft amber glow pulsed through the wax, as though the chapel itself remembered fire. At the front, the altar sagged beneath its own weight. Wax figures knelt along the pews, some intact, others warped by time. One clutched a book, another, a child's doll made of ash and string. None looked toward us. They faced the altar, silently enduring whatever devotion had been offered here. We moved carefully, our steps muffled by the soft floor. Osbert examined the altar, brushing away a layer of dust and flakes. "There," he whispered. Embedded in the wax, a hand, small, delicate, wearing a signet ring with a crest of 3 feathers and a thorn. The very one. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the wax, the ceiling began to hum. Low at first, then higher. Not a sound, but vibration. It rippled across my teeth, inside my chest. The chapel was remembering. The walls began to whisper, not words, just sounds, like pages turning in reverse, like someone practicing a forgotten name. I pulled the ring, the wax resisted, then yielded. A loud crack, and the hand crumbled to dust. The ring clattered onto the floor. The whispering stopped. Silence returned like a tide. We stood frozen. Then Osbert picked it up. "We leave," he said. No debate, no pride, just urgency. We retraced our steps. At the wall, the slit had begun to close, the wax healing itself. We squeezed through just as it sealed behind us, warm and final. Outside, the wind was loud, normal loud. Birds circled above. The world continued. We had the ring. We had done what we came to do. But something had shifted. Osbert didn't speak until we reached the edge of the field. Then, softly, he said, "Places like that remember more than people do." I didn't argue. That night we slept in a hayloft miles away, the ring wrapped in cloth beneath Osbert's cloak. I dreamed of candlelight, of prayers I couldn't understand, and of a ceiling that hummed to itself long after we were gone. And now, as the wax melts back into silence and the chapel of forgotten rituals drifts gently into the folds of your thoughts, let your breath soften. Because next, we'll wander into a festival that never ends, where masks hide more than faces, and laughter bends just slightly at the edges. Shall we? Somewhere beyond the sleepy hills and the flickering shadows of forgotten chapels, there's a town that never quite knows what day it is. Not because of poor record-keeping or foggy memory, but because every single day is part of the festival. It's called Varn Hollow, a place draped in streamers that never sag, where drums echo like distant heartbeats, and where masks are worn not just on faces, but in gestures, in speech, even in silence. It is always the festival of many veils in Varn Hollow. The reason, forgotten. The purpose, also forgotten. But the tradition continues, stubbornly cheerful, like a jester who refuses to admit the joke ended years ago. Osbert and I arrived at dusk. Not that dusk meant anything here. Each street was lit by coloured lanterns, each corner boasting dancers, jesters, and vendors shouting about candied figs shaped like mythical beasts. The cobbles were slick with rain and spilled cider. Laughter rang out, but never from the same direction twice. "Careful," Osbert muttered, adjusting the satchel under his cloak. "They say once you put on a mask here, it starts remembering you." I smirked. "You're worried about sentient papier-mâché?" "No," he said grimly. "I'm worried about who you become when you wear it." Our job this time was simple on paper, as always. Locate a man known only as the Clockwork Duke, a former noble turned eccentric recluse, said to have vanished into Varn Hollow during the 3rd moon cycle of the spring rains. He'd taken something, a pendant, small, silver, inlaid with a single opal. Our client wanted it back, not the Duke, just the pendant. Of course, no one knew what the Duke looked like anymore, because here everyone wore masks. The innkeeper wore a mask shaped like a fox yawning. The baker had one shaped like a melting candle. Even the children wore painted wood and delicate feathers. To remove a mask in public was considered rude. To ask what lay beneath was dangerous. So we too were given masks upon entering, a courtesy, they said. Osbert received one carved like a snoring lion. Mine resembled a startled hare. We tried not to take it personally. Finding the Duke required subtlety. We danced, we drank, we made inquiries. We learned that the Clockwork Duke played the glass organ at midnight, every night, from the tower above the bell square. But only if no one looked up, naturally. So we waited in the square. At midnight the crowd grew still, just as fell quiet. The wind stopped, and from above came a soft, eerie tune, like frost settling on velvet. Osbert looked up. Nothing. But when he looked away I saw movement. A figure in silhouette. Long coat, mask shaped like a broken clock. Fingers moving like whispers. We followed. Through alleys of music and whispers. Through crowds that bent around him like wind through wheat. He entered a tent marked with stars and stepped behind a curtain stitched with silver thread. We entered after. The tent was empty, except for one chair. On it, the pendant, and a note. It read, "You cannot steal what must be returned. Take it, and leave the mask." Osbert hesitated, then removed his lion mask and set it beside the pendant. The moment he did, the air shifted. The drums outside resumed. The laughter returned. The tent was gone. We stood in the square again, empty-handed, until I reached into my pocket and found the pendant resting there, warm and silent. The mask was gone. We didn't speak much that night. We left Van Hollow before dawn, our boots echoing across the quiet stones. The sun rose. The festival music faded behind us, like a dream trying to stay remembered. That night, by the edge of a stream, Osbert stared into the fire. "That place changes people," he said softly. I nodded. "Did it change you?" "Maybe," he said, "but I think it let me change back." Now, as the echoes of music fade and the last masks return to their boxes, let your thoughts soften, let your breathing slow. Because next, we enter the archives of Wind, a monastery built on a cliff, where every scroll is weighed with silence and every corridor tastes of storms. Shall we? The cliffs of Merrow's Edge are no place for casual visits. The wind doesn't simply blow there, it interrogates. It tugs at your cloak like a nosy aunt, whistles past your ears like it's gossiping about you, and occasionally howls with such grief you'd swear the stones themselves remember pain. At the very top of those cliffs, balanced impossibly on a crag that juts out like a stony balcony over the sea, sits the Wind Monastery. Built from pale grey stone that always feels cold to the touch, its windows are arrow slits and its bells don't ring. They hum, moved only by the strength of the gusts that barrel through the upper halls. We came on foot, having left our horses 3 days' journey behind. No road leads directly to the monastery. You must climb a path of uneven steps, carved into the cliffside with ropes tied for balance but weathered to the thickness of old thread. The wind tried to push us back. More than once it nearly succeeded, but we made it. Cold, sore and wind-whipped like old parchment, we arrived at the great door of the monastery and knocked 3 times with the bronze ring, shaped like a curled feather. A monk opened it. He wore robes the colour of fog and had eyes that looked like they'd seen too many storms. He didn't speak, just nodded and let us in. Our presence, it seemed, was expected. It often was. Inside, the monastery was quieter than anything I'd ever known. Not silent, just respectfully still. The kind of quiet that waits. The kind that holds its breath when you step on certain floorboards. The walls were covered in tapestries, mostly greys and blues, depicting wind as a force of wisdom. Hands made of air holding scrolls, gusts lifting lanterns, breezes carrying seeds across oceans. Every hall led to another. Every corridor opened into a chamber lined with scrolls, some new, most ancient, all stored with a kind of sacred caution. The monks, we learned, transcribed the wind, literally. They claimed that wind carried stories, secrets, even confessions. They wrote them down, no ink, just etchings on wax, sealed and stored in thin bone tubes labelled with the direction and strength of the breeze from which they were caught. It sounded absurd, until Osbert held one to his ear, and it whistled, not like a flute, like a memory. We were there to find one scroll in particular, commissioned 30 years ago, buried somewhere in the western stacks. It contained a confession whispered by a dying duke into the wind. That confession, if read aloud, would discredit a sitting bishop. The client wanted it. We were just the messengers. But the scroll wasn't where it was supposed to be. We searched for hours. The stacks were uneven, some rooms colder than others. One hallway had wind blowing upward through the floor cracks. We found scrolls about lost ships, forbidden loves, forgotten crimes, but not the one we needed. Until a monk approached us. No words, just an outstretched hand. He held a scroll wrapped in cloth. On the cloth, stitched in pale thread, was the symbol of the west wind. Gentle but persistent. Osbert unwrapped it. The bone tube was old, almost brittle. He tilted it. A sound drifted out. A whisper. I took the crown, but not the blame. It was enough. The client would be thrilled, probably scandalized too, but thrilled. As we turned to leave, the monk placed a second scroll in my hand. A gift, he said, for the path ahead. I opened it later, under a crooked pine on the far side of the cliff. No sound, just the faint scent of lavender and salt. I never told Osbert what I heard. That night we camped low on the hill, far from the monastery's humming halls. The stars above were unusually bright. The wind, gentler now, threaded through the leaves, and I swear it hummed a lullaby only we could hear. Now, as the gusts grow still and the stones of Merrow's Edge settle back into their ageless watch, let your breath ease. For next, we ride into the market town of Rook's Nest, where coins carry rumours, bakers sell baked lies, and not everything that clinks is gold. Shall we? Rook's Nest isn't the kind of town that announces itself. It doesn't sprawl like a city or whisper like a village. It hums constantly. A soft, steady hum of bartering, broom sweeping, lute strings tuning, and the ever-present clatter of coin. The air smells like roasted chestnuts, leather oil, and too many intentions. The cobbled streets spiral inward like a snail shell, with the central market at its core. Everything leads there. Every alley, every whisper, every broken wheel. And in that marketplace, people don't just sell goods. They sell stories. Fake maps to real places, real maps to fake ones. Truths dressed in fiction. Fiction sold as prophecy. Osbert and I arrived near midday, slipping into the current of people like stones dropped in a stream. Our client this time was a baker, or so she said. Her name was Elira, a woman with flour on her sleeves and eyes too sharp for someone who claimed to sell sponge cake. She pulled us aside behind a stall shaped like a mushroom and whispered, "Someone's baking messages into pastries. They're meant to look like mine, but they're not mine. I want you to find out who's copying me and stop them." Osbert blinked. "You want us to sabotage your competition?" "No," she said. "I want you to expose them. No sabotage, just truth. Publicly." That was new. Most people preferred the quiet sort of fixing. Elira wanted noise. So we began. Every bakery in Rook's Nest claimed to have invented something. Honeyed flan, rosemary buns, bread that makes you dream. But only one had recently started selling a new pastry, a spiral tart with blackberry glaze and a sugar-crusted rune pressed into the top. It looked innocent. It tasted divine. But if you read the sugar rune in candlelight, it spelled out a coded message. We confirmed this late one night in our rented room at the Whispering Rafter Inn, deciphering the pattern with a mirror and a second tart. The message read, "Do not trust the mayor." Interesting. The pastry stall belonged to a man named Bram, a former cartographer turned baker after allegedly getting bored of parchment. He was clever, charming, and wore his apron like armour. When confronted, he smiled. "Is truth not sweet when sugared?" Osbert crossed his arms. "You're forging someone else's baking style to spread subversion." Bram just nodded. "Yes, because no one reads flyers anymore, but they devour pie." We reported everything to Elira. She was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. Good. I needed to know how far he'd go. He was my apprentice, before he started stealing my recipes and, well, my ideas. "What now?" I asked. "Now?" she said. "I'll outbake him, with facts." The next day the Central Market hosted a baker's duel. Not with swords, with spoons. Elira unveiled a new tart, lemon thyme with a soft custard centre and a crust shaped like a question mark. The sugar letters inside spelled "Ask Bram about the stolen map vault." The crowd roared. Bram turned pale, and somewhere in the chaos, Osbert leaned over and whispered, "We're definitely in the right line of work." That night, with the market still glowing behind us and 2 leftover tarts tucked in our pack, we walked the slow road out of town. The stars were soft. The wind smelled faintly of burnt sugar and pride. I bit into the tart. It was warm, with just the right hint of rebellion. Now, as the noise of the marketplace fades into gentle hush and the sweet scent of secrets lingers in your thoughts, let your mind ease toward the cold, quiet cliffs of the northern coast, where a lighthouse shines without light and a keeper watches something no one else can see, shall we? The northern coast is no place for comfort. The wind there doesn't dance, it drills. It slices through wool and whispers things into your ears you'd rather not remember. The sea crashes below, relentless and unbothered, sending up salty spray and the occasional insult in the form of airborne kelp. On a jagged bluff above those crashing waves stands a lighthouse. Tall, silent, but not shining. It hasn't been lit in 50 years. Not because of disrepair, but because of choice. The keeper is still there, alone, watching, and that's exactly who we were sent to see. Osbert and I arrived near nightfall. The sky bruised purple, and the last light bled out behind the cliffs. We had to climb the final slope on foot, the wind tugging at our cloaks like a child with too many questions. At the top, the lighthouse loomed, not crumbling, not pristine, just waiting. The door opened before we could knock. The keeper was old, or at least worn down in the way that makes age hard to guess. He had a beard like tangled thread and eyes the colour of storm glass. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once, then turned and vanished inside. We followed. The inside of the lighthouse was warmer than expected. A stove burned in the corner, kettle humming gently. Shelves lined the walls, books, jars, and dozens of notebooks filled with scribbles and symbols. The keeper pointed to a chair. We sat. Osbert cleared his throat. "We're here for the ledger." The keeper blinked, then moved to a small drawer, pulled out a thin, leather-bound book and placed it gently on the table. It looked ordinary, worn, water-stained, but inside it contained records of ships that never made it to port, ships that should have been safe, ships whose fates were tied to a single night, the last time the lighthouse was lit. According to legend, the light didn't guide that night. It summoned, and everything that responded didn't come from the sea. Osbert opened the ledger slowly. The final entry read, "Light extinguished. Eyes returned to the deep. We are not keepers. We are watched." That's when the humming started. Not from the kettle, from the tower above. The keeper stood. He did not look frightened, only tired. "The wind is rising," he said, the first and only words we ever heard him speak. We climbed the spiral staircase with him, floor by floor. At the top, where the great lens once turned, there was no flame, just a ring of glass panels etched with markings that pulsed faintly in the dark. The keeper placed his palm on one. The hum deepened. Osbert reached out, but I stopped him. Some things don't want more hands involved. After a long moment, the keeper removed his hand. The hum faded. The room exhaled. He turned to us. "Take the book," he said. "Tell them it's over." Osbert took the ledger. We climbed down. Outside, the wind had shifted. Quieter now, as if holding its breath. We didn't speak until the tower was far behind us, its silhouette swallowed by fog. "What was watching?" I asked. Osbert shook his head. "I don't think it was ever meant to be answered." That night we camped by a low dune, waves murmuring just out of reach. The ledger lay wrapped in cloth. We didn't open it again. Some jobs you finish, others just stop asking questions. And now, as the hum of that unlit beacon fades gently into memory and the sea laps at the edge of your thoughts, let your mind wander toward a forest where coins grow on trees, but only thieves dare pick them, shall we? Deep within the Renvin forest, where sunlight filters down in ribbons and the air always smells faintly of mint and loam, there's a place the locals won't name out loud. They call it the Grove, or the Shimmering Hollow, or sometimes more nervously, that place where the coins grow, and they do. Not from the earth, not scattered by passers-by, but growing, from branches, from bark, from the undersides of leaves, coins of every shape and era, some ancient, some bearing faces of rulers who never existed, each one fused to a leaf stem like fruit that made a bad decision. Osbert had heard of the grove years ago, during a job gone sideways near the border of Renvin. A bard in a tavern had mentioned it between verses about unfortunate romance and livestock. We never thought we'd go looking for it, until someone hired us to steal a single coin from it. Not just any coin. One with the mark of the sunken duke, a ruler said to have been buried twice, once in soil, once in memory. Why this coin mattered we weren't told, only that it hung on the third branch of the westernmost tree and shimmered like oil when the moon was high. We arrived at twilight. The forest was quiet in that reverent way that only old places are. Not the hush of stillness, but the weight of listening. Every twig underfoot seemed to sigh. The trees leaned slightly inward, their trunks thick with moss, their leaves impossibly green. And there, where the canopy broke just enough to let in the soft glow of moonlight, we found it, the grove. Dozens of trees, their branches sagging with weight, not of fruit but of coins, gold, silver, copper, even some we couldn't name, no two alike, no two still, because they moved, not wildly, not loudly, just a gentle swaying like wind, but the air was still, completely still. Osbert stepped into the grove first. The moment his boot touched the moss, a low chime echoed through the trees, like someone striking a goblet in another world. We moved carefully, respectfully. No grabbing, no sudden gestures. The trees didn't like greed. That was the rule the bard had mentioned. You take too much, or take the wrong one, and the grove takes something back. No one knew what. A memory, a finger, a name. The tree didn't explain. We found the westernmost tree easily. It was taller than the others, pale. Its bark shimmered faintly, like frost. And there, just as described, hung the coin, third branch. Moonlight caught it, and yes, it shimmered. Not like gold, but like thought. Osbert reached up, slowly. He wore gloves made from cloth soaked in rainwater and ash, as instructed. He touched the coin. The tree went still. The chime stopped. Then a whisper, not in words, just in meaning. Something old, something tired, something that asked, why this one? Osbert didn't answer. He simply nodded. The coin released from the branch like it had been waiting for that. No snap, no struggle. It simply let go. We stepped back. No alarms, no punishment. Just silence. The grove sighed. A breeze stirred, the first of the night. As we turned to leave, another coin fell behind us, striking the moss with a soft clink. A gift? A warning? We didn't check. Back at camp, we didn't light a fire. The coin sat between us on a folded cloth. Osbert stared at it. Feels heavier than it should? I nodded. Maybe it remembers where it's been. He wrapped it carefully. Let's make sure it forgets. Now, as the shimmer of that quiet grove fades from your thoughts, and the gentle rustle of moss and metal settles like dust, let your breath slow and follow us toward a desert outpost, where shadows outnumber people, and the well speaks more than the villagers. Shall we? There is a place so dry, so parched, that even the flies have given up. A stretch of cracked earth and sun-blasted stone known only as Dust Reach. It lies at the edge of the great hollow waste, where maps grow vague and compasses spin from boredom. Few live there, and those who do are either running from something, hiding something, or simply forgot how to leave. But despite the emptiness, there is a reason people come. The well. The Whispering Well, as they call it. Sunken deep in the centre of the settlement, wrapped in crumbling bricks and prayer flags bleached white by the sun. They say it doesn't hold water, only words, secrets, warnings, sometimes names. If you lean close, the wind pulls a truth from your bones and answers back with one of its own. Osbert and I arrived just past midday, cloaks drawn tight against the heat, boots powdered with dust that clung like regret. The village consisted of maybe 9 structures, flat-roofed, silent. A few goats wandered aimlessly, chewing on memories. The well sat at the centre, just as described. Rope frayed, bucket long gone. A brass plate beside it read, "Do not speak unless spoken to." Not exactly reassuring. We were sent to retrieve something from it. A single coin-sized disc etched with a sigil resembling a thorn coiled around a flame. It wasn't currency. It was a key, or so we were told. To what? No one said. Just that the well had it, and the well would give it, but only if we asked correctly. Osbert had a list of phrases written in 3 dialects. Some were questions, some were riddles. One was just a long sigh. We waited until sunset. The wind cooled slightly. Shadows stretched thin and tired. Osbert approached the well and leaned in. "What do you keep for the ones who forget?" he asked. The well was silent. He tried another. "Who do you hold when no one looks?" Still nothing. Then I stepped forward, not with a question, but with a memory. I whispered, "I once ran from a name I didn't choose." And the well replied, a low, gravelly whisper, one word, "Same." Then a soft click, like stone against metal. A compartment at the base opened, revealing the disc. Dull, warm, and pulsing faintly like it had a slow heartbeat. We took it. The villagers didn't look at us as we left. One old woman offered a jug of water. We drank. She nodded. No words exchanged, none needed. That night we camped beneath the broken ribs of an old wind shrine. The disc lay between us. Osbert watched the stars. "You think the well listens all the time?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe it remembers for those who can't." He nodded. Didn't speak again. Sleep came easy, like it often does when the air cools just right and the sky forgets how to worry. Now, as the sun slips behind the edge of dust reach and the well's whisper grows soft in the folds of your mind, let your thoughts drift to the soft hills of a far-off farm, where nothing grows anymore and the scarecrow knows far too much. Shall we? There's a farm that no longer grows anything. No wheat, no barley, no hopeful green shoots poking through dark soil, just rows of dry furrows that stretch toward a crooked horizon and a house that sags like it's tired of pretending anyone will come home. This farm, tucked between hills that forgot how to bloom, is known as Greyward. No one owns it anymore. Not officially. The last name on the deed faded years ago, but people say the scarecrow still watches, that it shifts when no one's looking, that its stitched mouth whispers warnings if the wind is right. We didn't come for crops. We came for a lockbox buried beneath the old potato shed, if the map we'd acquired from a jittery tavern drunk could be trusted. The box was said to contain a letter never delivered, a deed never signed, and something even more valuable, a seal bearing the crest of the Iron March. A seal lost during a brief but bloody feud between neighbouring lords who'd decided arrows were more persuasive than lawyers. Osbert and I arrived at dawn. The fog clung to our boots thick and low. The farmhouse loomed at the top of the slope, its windows blank as forgetting. The fields stretched out in silence, interrupted only by the scarecrow in the centre, tall, draped in blackened burlap, its arms stiff, its head crowned with a tattered wide-brimmed hat. From a distance it looked like it was leaning just slightly, watching. We ignored it. For now, the potato shed was easy enough to find, half-collapsed, more rust than roof. Inside we found broken crates, a rake missing its teeth, and the faint smell of something that once hoped to be garlic. Osbert started digging. The soil was dry but gave way easily. After about an hour the shovel struck something solid. The lockbox, small, iron, stained with rust and old thumbprints. The seal was intact, though the lock was cracked, as if someone had tried to force it open. Osbert pried it gently. Inside, papers as promised. A locket, a broken ring, and the seal. Heavy, cold, still bearing the emblem of the Iron March, a hawk clutching a scroll in its claws. We stood to leave, and the scarecrow was closer. Not by much, but enough. Osbert stiffened. Did it move? I didn't answer. We walked, quick, not running. The box under Osbert's arm. The wind had picked up, soft at first but rising in a strange rhythm. a dry rattle like fabric against wood. The scarecrow's hat lifted slightly. Trick of the breeze? We didn't look back. Not even when we reached the edge of the farm and heard the creak of rope and the faint scrape of something dragging through soil. We camped miles away that night. Didn't talk much, just stared into the fire and tried not to wonder what the scarecrow had been guarding and whether taking the box had woken something up. Now, as the field fades from view and the stitched mouth of the watching figure is lost behind a veil of mist and memory, let your breath slow. For next, we'll drift to a moonlit inn that only appears to travellers who've forgotten their names and whose rooms remember too much. Shall we? They say there's an inn that only appears when you've forgotten where you're going. Or worse, who you are. It doesn't sit on any map, doesn't show up on routes drawn by cartographers or whispered by road-worn traders. You don't find it, it finds you. And when it does, you're already halfway through the door, uncertain whether you're entering for the first time, or coming back from someplace you can't quite recall. Osbert and I had been travelling for days. No job, no client, just a slow southward drift under thinning trees and the kind of rain that never quite falls but soaks you all the same. We hadn't spoken in hours, not because of a fight, just fatigue. Thought had worn thin. Names were starting to feel heavier than they should. I remember stepping off the trail to get a better look at a bent mile marker. I remember the smell of cedar, and then suddenly there it was, the inn. 2 stories, timber frame, moss climbing the side like gossip. A lantern flickering on a crooked hook. Its sign swung gently in the wind, the mirrorless rest. We didn't question it. We didn't think to. Inside it was warm. Firelight soft as memory. The floorboards creaked in the way that makes your shoulders drop, not your guard. A woman greeted us from behind the counter. Her face was kind, but unmemorable, like a favourite song whose lyrics always escape you. "Welcome," she said. 2 rooms?" Osbert nodded. I tried to speak my name. I couldn't remember it. Not my real name, not my alias, not even a nickname. I looked at Osbert. "Do you—" He blinked. "You too?" The woman only smiled. "You'll remember when you're ready. The rooms help." That should have been strange, but it felt right. We took the keys and climbed the stairs. My room smelled of sage and old linen. The bed was already turned down. A small candle burned in a dish carved with runes I didn't recognize. On the nightstand, a notebook, empty, a quill, dry ink. I slept and dreamed. Not of places or faces, but moments. Lighting a lantern in a thunderstorm, laughing as a chicken chased Osbert across a barn, crying once alone over a letter I never sent, all without names, just the feelings, soft-edged and warm. When I woke, the candle had gone out. The notebook now held one line written in my own hand. "You're more than what you remember." I stared at it for a long time. Downstairs, Osbert sat by the hearth. He held his notebook. It was blank. He looked up. "I think the inn only reminds you of what you're ready to carry." I nodded. We left without paying, not because we were thieves, because no one asked. The inn was gone an hour later. We looked back. Just mist and trees, not even footprints. That night, by a fire lit with dry moss and quiet gratitude, I asked Osbert if he remembered what we were chasing before we found the inn. He shook his head. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it didn't. Now, as the candlelight of that quiet place flickers in the background of your mind, and the scent of cedar and memory drifts past, let your breath steady. Because next, we find ourselves on a river where no boat can sail straight, and every bend leads to someone else's mistake. Shall we? Some rivers carry water, some carry trade. This one carried something else. The locals called it the wending, not the winding, the wending, as if even the name wasn't sure where it was going. It flowed through no known kingdom, it appeared on no agreed-upon map, and it never moved in quite the same direction twice. To sail it was to surrender any plan you'd ever made, and yet there were stories about people who needed answers, people who needed to forget or forgive, and how the wending always took them where they needed to go, whether they liked it or not. Our job wasn't to sail it, not at first. We were to retrieve a ledger from a courier boat called the Humble Turnip, which had failed to arrive at its intended port 2 weeks ago. It was last seen drifting onto the Wending with a crew of 3 and a crate full of signed treaties. Now it was gone. We were told to find the ledger if possible, or at least confirm it's lost. The kind of mission that screams, "Please don't come back with ghosts." We reached the riverbank at dusk. The water was slow, dark, and glinting faintly under a half-awake moon. A skiff waited for us, tied lazily to a bent post. Osbert checked the knot. "It's been used recently," I nodded, stepping in. "Do we have a plan?" He grinned. "No, it's the Wending. We just go." We untied the rope and pushed off. The river accepted us. It didn't roar, didn't gurgle, it just pulled. Softly, unapologetically. The first thing we passed was a man fishing from a floating chair. Just a chair. No boat, no oars. He wore a scarf made of peacock feathers and winked as we floated by. "The turnip turned," he called, then burst into laughter. Osbert raised an eyebrow. "Promising start." The current carried us on, then a bend, followed by the same bend again. Same tree, same stone, same bird glaring at us from a branch. "Didn't we just—" "Yes," I muttered. "It's looping. But different each time." On the third pass, the tree had a mark carved in it, a symbol I'd drawn weeks ago in a completely different forest. On the fourth, Osbert saw his reflection in the water, but younger, smiling, something he hadn't done in a while. We stopped rowing, not that we'd been steering much. The Wending didn't want help, it just wanted honesty. So we waited. Let the current carry us, no fight, no resistance. By the 7th loop, a fog began to rise. Thin at first, then heavy, like wool soaked in river water. From it emerged the humble turnip, motionless, empty. We tied off and boarded. The deck was undisturbed, no sign of struggle. But in the captain's cabin, the ledger, resting on the desk, open to a page dated tomorrow, signed in a hand that looked suspiciously like Osbert's. He frowned. "I never signed this." "Not yet," I said softly. The page read, "We found what we weren't looking for." We took the ledger, didn't speak. As we stepped off the boat, the fog began to clear, and the Wending turned, just slightly, enough to carry us downstream, towards solid ground. We disembarked near a village we didn't recognize, but that somehow felt familiar. An old woman handed us bread and didn't ask our names. The ledger remained closed. We didn't open it again. Some rivers don't like being questioned, they only ask that you float. Now, as the water stills behind us and the hum of the Wending fades into the background, let your breath quiet. Because next, we'll travel to a mountain where no one climbs and where the bells ring for people who haven't yet died. Shall we? Mount Gildenmore rises like a broken tooth from the earth, sharp, weather-beaten and covered in a cold mist that never burns off. No trails lead up its face. No goats graze its slopes. The villagers in the lowlands don't speak its name after dark. They say the mountain rings bells for the dying, not the already dead, the not yet dead. That when the wind shifts just right, you'll hear a chime from the summit, and someone below will gasp as if a hand just brushed their shoulder. No one knows who rings the bells. Some think it's monks who never came down. Others say it's the wind itself wrapped around ropes tied to rusting iron. We didn't come to solve the mystery. We came because a nobleman had received a letter stamped with the seal of his brother, presumed dead for 6 years and dated 3 days ago. The letter said only, "You'll hear the bell when the mist breaks, follow it. The truth is kept where no steps echo." And so we followed. The base of the mountain was colder than it should have been. The ground was dry, cracked, dusted with frost despite the summer. No birds, no insects, just wind and stone. Osbert carried the satchel. I carried the coil of rope more out of habit than hope. We climbed. It wasn't steep, just long and strange. Every 100 steps we passed a small stone tower. Empty, round, no roof. Inside each one was a broken bench and often a scrap of something. An old boot, a rusted spoon, a ribbon pinned to the wall with an iron nail. Markers, perhaps, or offerings. At the 5th tower we heard it. A bell. Soft, not mournful, just final, like a period at the end of a long sentence. We looked at each other, kept climbing. The summit came suddenly, as if the mountain grew tired of resisting. No grand view, just more fog and one large stone platform. On it, a bell tower. Wood so old it looked petrified, and beneath it, a door, half buried in rock. We pried it open, and inside a spiral staircase leading down, not up, down, into the mountain. The descent was slow, quiet. The air grew warmer, damp. The stone walls were smooth, as if water had shaped them. At the bottom, a room, circular, lit by oil lamps that hadn't burned out, and sitting in the centre, an old man, wrapped in wool, eyes cloudy but sharp beneath the surface. He looked at us, smiled. "I knew someone would come," he said. Osbert stepped forward. "Your brother sent you." The man nodded. "He thinks I died. That's all right. I needed him to believe it." "Why?" I asked. "Because some truths are safer buried under stone." He handed Osbert a small box. Inside, the original deed to a disputed borderland, one that, if revealed, would end a war before it began. "The letter wasn't a mistake?" I asked. "No," he said. "The bell rang for the truth, not for me." We left him there, per his request. The mountain kept his secret. The bell didn't ring again. We descended slowly, the mist thicker now, wrapping around our arms like old memories. At the base, the wind had shifted. The frost had melted. Something had changed. But the mountain said nothing. We returned the box to the client, who burned it without reading. Some people don't want answers, only the silence that follows them. Now, as the chime of Gildenmore fades into the deep stillness of your thoughts, let your breath drift easy. For next, we find ourselves at a crossroads where none of the signs agree, and each path remembers a different version of you, shall we? There's a place on the edge of 3 forests, 4 trade routes, and no known jurisdiction where travellers find themselves uncertain. Not lost, uncertain. The roads all meet in a perfect X, carved into the earth so deeply that even tree roots hesitate before crossing it. They say it's cursed, but not in the traditional way. No plague, no ghosts, just confusion. A kind of forgetting that blooms quietly the longer you stand there. The locals call it the crossroads of unchosen paths. You won't find it on a map. Maps don't like admitting it exists. We didn't plan to stop there. Osbert and I were tracking a runaway scribe carrying a ledger that could undo half a noble's family tree. We were following rumours through the marshlands when we saw the fork in the road. Then a bend, then, inexplicably, a straight line. We arrived at the crossroads near dusk. The sky above the clearing was clear, too clear, still. No birds, no breeze. 4 signposts stood at each road's mouth, each pointing in a different direction, each labelled the same, "You're almost there." Osbert stared. Comforting. I stepped forward. The moment my boot touched the centre, everything shifted. Not the sky, not the ground. Me. My memory wobbled. I couldn't remember why we were there. Not clearly. Something about parchment. No, a pendant. No. I blinked. Osbert looked back at me. "Do you remember where we came from?" I hesitated. "No. Do you?" Not a clue. The signs began to hum, softly, each post vibrating just slightly. Osbert stepped off the cross. I stayed. That's when I saw myself. 4 versions, 1 on each road. One walking with confidence toward a mountain I'd never seen. One riding a horse across a field filled with music. One hiding under a tavern stairwell. One sitting beside a river, alone, older. They weren't hallucinations, they were possibilities. Versions of me from choices I hadn't made. Paths not taken. Lives that whispered could have been. I turned away. The moment I did, they vanished. The signs fell silent. Osbert reached out a hand. "I think this place feeds on decisions we didn't make," I nodded. "Which way?" "Whichever way we forget about first." So we spun, closed our eyes, walked in a direction we wouldn't remember. We emerged miles later in a glade filled with frogs and fireflies. No crossroads behind us, just grass and a sky blinking gently overhead. The confusion passed slowly. Memory returned in pieces. The scribe, the ledger, the job. We were back. That night beside a fire made from driftwood and quiet relief, I asked Osbert what he'd seen. He didn't answer, just stared into the flames and whispered, "Not this." We didn't speak of the crossroads again, but sometimes, when we had to choose a path, I'd see his fingers twitch like he was spinning a coin he didn't have. Now, as those unchosen paths fold back into the mist and the signs go quiet once more, let your thoughts settle, because next we arrive at our final tale, a quiet village where assassins go to disappear and where the past comes calling in the softest voice. Shall we? At the very edge of every map, just past the ink where the cartographer's hand hesitated, there is a village drawn only in whispers. No signs point to it. No road leads there. It appears when the wind tires and disappears when you try to tell someone about it. They call it Haven Hollow, though not out loud and never twice. The people who live there don't ask where you came from. They don't ask your name. They offer you bread, a place to sleep, and a moment to let your breath catch up to the life you ran from. That's where we ended up. Not by design, not even by accident. We were simply done. Osbert and I had walked for a week without a job. No clients, no plans. Just a slow unravelling of road beneath tired boots. It rained twice. We didn't mind. Somewhere in the middle of a dense thicket, the trees opened to reveal a cobbled path we hadn't seen before. It wasn't there the day before, but it was there now, so we followed it. The village sat low in a gentle valley, chimneys puffing soft smoke, lanterns glowing as if they'd been waiting for someone specific. We didn't speak as we entered. No one greeted us, but every door was open, just enough to say, "We see you." Not with suspicion, with understanding. The inn didn't have a name, just a sign that swayed in silence. Inside, the fire was already lit. A woman with grey braids and hands that knew work nodded toward 2 bowls of stew. No questions, no price, just food. We ate, we stayed. For a night, then another, then a week. Time softened. We chopped wood for an old man who could no longer lift an axe. We fixed a barn roof with a boy who didn't speak but hummed lullabies through his teeth. Osbert taught a baker how to grind her own flour. I swept the chapel steps and didn't flinch when the bell rang, even though no one pulled the rope. It was a place for those who had done too much, seen too much, or simply couldn't carry the story anymore. There were others like us. You could tell by the way they carried their shoulders, how their hands always hovered near their belts, then slowly drifted away with each passing day. No one here needed a weapon. The village had no guards, but there had been no trouble in 100 years. One morning I awoke to find Osbert gone. Not missing, just gone. A note on the table read, "Time for me to not be anyone for a while. Stay if you want. You've earned stillness." I did. For a while, I helped in the garden, taught a girl how to read a compass, rebuilt a gate with a man who claimed to be a retired prince but made terrible soup. We didn't talk about the past. The village didn't want it. The trees whispered just loud enough to remind you, you are safe now. One foggy morning a knock came at the inn door. A young man, cloak too clean, eyes too eager. He asked, "Is this where the assassin lives?" The innkeeper didn't answer. I stood, not angry, just done. "No," I said, "they're not here." He blinked, looked at me. Something in his posture softened. He left. I returned to the hearth, let the soup boil, let the past walk away on quiet feet, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't follow. Now, dear listener, as the embers fade and the stories settle like dust on an old blade laid finely to rest, may these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off, let me know below. Sweet dreams, and may your path, wherever it wanders, be gentler than the one we walked together. Shh. This has been Stories That Make You Sleep. Rest well.